When you're finished making all of your changes and you're ready to open your image into Photoshop, or if you're going to save it even without going through Photoshop, you're going to want to make sure that you pay attention to your workflow settings. This little hyperlink right down here, when you click on this, it will show you all of your workflow options. For color space, I'm going to recommend that we use the Adobe RGB color space for this training series, but there are additional options. For example, if I knew that I was going to bypass Photoshop and instead I just needed to save, 100 images that I wanted to place online, then I might change this to sRGB because sRGB is the most common color space that you would find on the web. If you wanted to make use of a color space that's even larger than Adobe RGB, then we can go ahead and choose ProPhoto. ProPhoto is going to give you even more colors, and many would argue that I'm actually limiting the colors that I work with unnecessarily by choosing to work in Adobe RGB. However, there can be a slight mismatch where ProPhoto can contain more colors than the typical monitor can display. So as a nice compromise, I'm going to suggest that you choose Adobe RGB for the work that you take into Photoshop for this training series. If you're going to the web, then we definitely want to change it to sRGB. As far as bit depth go, I would encourage you to work in 16-bit per channel. There's more information in a 16-bit per channel image than there is in an 8-bit. Now, the files will be a little bit larger, but I think file size is a small price to pay for better image quality. As for the size, if you know that you're going to enlarge your image, you'll want to do that here in Camera Raw as early in your workflow as you can, as opposed to taking it to Photoshop and resampling your image there. If you're working with a RAW file, you will probably see more options than what we're seeing here by default. The reason that we're only seeing the two is that I've actually saved this file as a compressed DNG at a smaller file size. So we're a little bit limited in our options, but you can see that any option that has a plus icon next to it means that Camera Raw will have to sample up the image in order to get that pixel count. The option without one tells me that that is the native size of this file. You might also see an option for a minus, which means that Camera Raw would resample down your image in order to give you that size of a file. In the resolution area here, all you're doing is you're setting a print resolution. So if I change this to 300 pixels per inch, you'll notice that the total pixel count didn't change. I'm just telling Camera Raw how many pixels I want it to put per inch. As for your sharpening options, this is going to depend on whether you're going to take this image into Photoshop or if you're going to just save a number of images using the Save Image option down here in the lower left. If I'm going to take the image into Photoshop, then I don't really want to sharpen it now. I want to sharpen it at the end of my workflow when I'm ready to take my image, whether it's to print on glossy paper or on matte paper, or I would sharpen it for the screen as the last step. But like I said, if I'm not going to Photoshop and I just need to maybe export 100 images to post in a web photo gallery, then I would want to go ahead and add my sharpening now, and in fact, I would choose screen if I was going to the web. As far as the amount goes, you then have three options, low, standard, or high. I would go ahead and choose standard by default, but know if your image comes out looking too sharp, a little bit too crispy and pixelated, you might want to drop this down to low. Likewise, if it comes out looking a little too soft, you might want to scoot it up to high. And in later tutorials, we're going to be talking about how you can open your images into Photoshop as a smart object, which has a really, really flexible and non-destructive workflow. But for now, we'll go ahead and leave that unchecked. All right, we'll click OK, and I think that you can see that those options are quite important, yet they're very easy to overlook because of this small little hyperlink. So to create the correct file for your workflow, be sure that you check those workflow settings before using the Save option in the lower left, or before opening your files into Photoshop using the options on the right.